My sister accused me of something sick. I fixed her life, but my parents let them destroy me. Years later, her confession took everything. I'm Eric, 33 years old, and this is the story of how my sister, I'll call her Anne, completely ruined my life with a lie, and what unfolded afterward. But to fully understand, you have to know what things were like before everything fell apart. Growing up, Anne and I were incredibly close, probably closer than most siblings, despite our 4-year age difference. We were basically best friends. I know that sounds strange now, considering everything that happened. But back then, it was just normal, you know? I was never the bright kid at school. I struggled with my grades and barely passed most classes. But I had a real passion for electronics, not programming or computers, but more like taking things apart and putting them back together. I started with old TV remotes and radios I'd find at yard sales. By the time I was 16, I had an entire setup in my room. A soldering iron, multimeters, boxes full of circuit boards and wires. My parents thought it was odd, especially since I'd spend hours there with the door locked. Yeah, that'll matter later. But Anne understood. She was 10. When I started getting serious about electronics, she'd just sit in my room for hours watching me work. She'd ask all kinds of questions about what different parts did, why I was connecting certain wires, that sort of thing. Sometimes she'd help me organize my components or hold things while I soldered. It was our thing, you know, our parents. Definitely played favorites, though. Anne was the perfect kid. Straight A's, gymnastics team, student council, the whole package. Meanwhile, I was barely passing classes and spending all my time either locked away with electronics or at the skate park. But Anne always had my back. Like once in my junior year, I got caught smoking behind the gym. Instead of letting me get suspended, Anne made up this whole story that I was just holding the cigarette for someone else who ran off. She even cried to the principal, saying I was trying to turn my life around and a suspension would ruin everything. The principal totally believed her. She helped me with homework too. She was way better at explaining things than my teachers. She'd break down math problems in ways that actually made sense to me. Honestly, she was probably the only reason I graduated high school. I looked out for her as well. Being the older brother, I was pretty protective, maybe too much. Looking back, any guy interested in her had to get past me first. I wasn't trying to be a jerk, I just didn't want random guys messing with my little sister. Even when I started getting into trouble, staying out late, hanging with the wrong crowd, she never judged me. She covered for me with our parents, making excuses when I missed curfew. One time I came home at 3 a.m. and she was sitting on the porch waiting for me, just to make sure I got home safe. Looking back now, maybe we were too close. Maybe that's why it was so easy for people to believe what she said later. But back then, it felt normal. She was my sister, my best friend, the only person who really understood me. Our parents tried to get me interested in normal things. They signed me up for sports teams and after-school clubs, but I always ended up back with my electronics. They thought I was wasting my time, but Anne defended me. "He's good at it," she'd say. "Let him do what he loves." That's the Anne I try to remember sometimes. The little sister who believed in me when no one else did. The one who brought me snacks while I worked on projects, who stood up for me with our parents, who trusted me enough to come to me with her problems. This is harder to write than I thought it would be. When everything started falling apart, I was 18, barely graduated from high school. Anne was 16 and beginning to attract attention from guys at her school. Being the overprotective brother I did what any big brother would do. I scared them off, not by beating anyone up, just by making sure they knew I was watching. There was this one guy, Jake, who was especially persistent, a senior driving a fancy car his parents bought him. Typical rich kid stuff. I caught him trying to get Anne to skip class with him one day. I probably shouldn't have shoved him against his car, but come on, he was 18 trying to get my 16-year-old sister to skip school. What brother wouldn't be pissed? That's when the rumors started. At first, it was just quiet whispers. People at Anne's school saying things about how weird it was that I was so protective of her. Then it got worse. Someone started spreading. Rumors like, the reason he didn't want other guys near Anne was because he wanted her for himself. Sick stuff like that. I remember the exact moment I realized something was seriously wrong. It was a Tuesday after school. Usually Anne would come to my room to hang out while I worked on my projects, but this time she went straight to her room. When I knocked to check on her, she told me to go away. Later that night, I found her crying in the kitchen. When I tried to hug her like I always did when she was upset, she flinched, actually pulled away from me. That had never happened before. She mumbled something about being tired and went back to her room. The next few days were strange. She stopped coming to my room, stopped talking to me altogether. Honestly, I thought she was just going through some teenage mood or phase. I should have known better. Then one morning I was working on an old radio I'd found, and I heard someone knocking on the front door. Not a normal knock, but that loud, official kind that makes your stomach drop instantly. 2 cops and a woman in a suit were standing there. When my dad opened the door, they asked to speak with him privately first. I could hear them talking in the kitchen but couldn't make out what they were saying. Then my dad called me down. I'll never forget the look on his face. It was like he was staring at a stranger. The woman in the suit introduced herself as someone from Child Protective Services, CPS. She said they needed to ask me some questions about my relationship with Anne. Turns out Anne had gone to her guidance counselor and told them I'd been, this is still hard to write, touching her inappropriately. She said that's why I was always locked in my room, that I made her come in there, and yeah, you can guess the rest. She told them I'd threatened to hurt her if she ever told anyone, said that's why he was so aggressive with guys who showed interest in her. She even claimed he used the electronic stuff as a cover, that the wires and zip ties in his room were for other things. My dad didn't question any of it, not once. He just stood there nodding while they spoke, like suddenly everything made sense. All those hours I spent in my room, the locked door, my protectiveness over Anne. In his mind, it all added up to something sick. I tried to explain, showed them my projects, the half-fixed radio on my desk, boxes of circuit boards and old electronics. I told them about how Anne used to watch me work, how she'd help organize parts, but they'd already made up their minds. The CPS woman kept asking leading questions. Did I make Anne feel special by letting her help? Did I tell her she was different from other girls? Everything I said just made it sound worse. When they asked about the time I pushed Jake, Anne had twisted that too. She said I was jealous because she was starting to like other guys, that I couldn't handle her growing up and having normal relationships because it meant losing control over her. The worst part was this whole story she had about how I'd gotten more aggressive lately because she was pulling away. How I told her she was betraying me by talking to other guys. None of it was true, but the way she said it, even I almost believed it, and then I lost it right there in front of everyone. Anne, what the hell are you saying? My voice cracked, not from anger but from pure disbelief. She wouldn't look at me. Anne, look at me. She kept her eyes on the floor, arms wrapped around herself like she was some fragile thing that needed protection. That little act made me even angrier. You know this isn't true. You know it. I turned to our dad, desperate. Dad, come on. You know me. I would never. His voice was low and steady, but his face, I'd never seen him look at me like that before. Not disappointed, not angry, just done. You don't even want to hear me out. I stepped forward, but he raised his hand like I was a threat. Anne flinched. She flinched. That was it. That was when I knew. You can't seriously believe this. My voice dropped. All the fight suddenly drained out of me. I looked at Anne again. Really looked at her. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. Why are you doing this? I whispered. She finally looked up. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to say something. Maybe she was going to take it all back. But then she glanced at Dad, at the CPS woman, at the cop standing in our living room. And that's when she doubled down, her eyes filling with tears. She took a shaky breath and whispered, I'm sorry, Eric. Right then, I understood. She wasn't going to retract it because it was too late. Because she was too far in, because she was terrified of the consequences. I laughed, actually laughed. "Wow," I said. "You're really doing this. You're actually doing this." Anne wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Dad clenched his jaw. "Get your things. We're going to the station." And that was it. No trial, no evidence, no real questions. Just my dad driving me to the police station in silence. Like I was already guilty. Like I was a stranger, like I wasn't his son anymore. On the way there, all I could think about was how they had twisted everything to fit their story. The lonely older brother who spent all his time locked away in his room, the strange hobby with tools and wires, the aggressive protectiveness, the close bond that suddenly turned toxic. They saw exactly what they wanted to see. The interview room at the station was just like in the movies. They left me sitting there for what felt like hours before 2 detectives came in. The male detective, Rivers, played good cop, saying things like, "We just want to understand what happened, Eric. Help us help you." The female detective, I don't remember her name, just sat there taking notes, shooting me looks like I was dirt. Rivers started asking about my electronics hobby. "Tell me about the things you build," he said, trying to sound interested. So I explained about fixing old radios, building simple circuits, basic stuff, and how Anne would help me with these projects. Yeah, she'd organize parts, hold things while I soldered. She liked learning about it. The female detective cut in. "So you'd have her alone in your room, door locked, handling your equipment." That's when it hit me how they were twisting everything. Every normal thing suddenly sounded wrong. They kept pressing about the locked door. I locked it because I had expensive tools. I tried explaining how Dad would borrow stuff and not put it back. "Or maybe," Rivers said, his voice getting harsher, "you locked it for other reasons." They had this whole file of statements and so-called evidence claiming I'd started touching Anne when she was 12, right when she began showing interest in my projects, how I used the electronics as a way to isolate her, made her feel special by teaching her things no one else knew. "That's insane," I said. "She's my sister. I was teaching her because she was interested." The female detective leaned forward. Interested in electronics? Or afraid of what would happen if she wasn't? Then they brought up the Jake incident. But in their version, I'd attacked him because he was taking Anne away from me. They had statements from other kids at school about how possessive I was, how I'd scared away any guy who came near her. Rivers pulled out photos of my room taken that morning. They'd made it look like some kind of torture chamber. Close-ups of my tools, wires, the zip ties I used for cable management. Even my project notes looked sinister in their photos. "Your father says you'd spend hours alone with Anne in this room," Rivers said. "Want to tell us what really happened in there?" I lost it, started yelling about how they were making normal brother-sister stuff sound twisted. "Bad move." Rivers just nodded like I'd confirmed something. "Classic defensive reaction," he told his partner. Then they brought up my grades, my lack of friends, the hours alone in my room. They built this whole profile of an isolated, unstable guy obsessed with his sister. They weren't just investigating. They were building a case, and the more I denied it, the guiltier I looked. My lawyer, if you could call her that, barely fought back. "We need to consider a plea deal," she told me, as if it was my only option. "If this goes to trial, you could face 20 years in prison." After hours of this, Rivers finally said, "Look, Eric, here's the deal. We have enough for serious charges, but if you cooperate, admit what happened, and show remorse, we can help you." "I didn't do anything wrong," I said for probably the 100th time. "Then explain why Anne would make this up." I couldn't. It didn't make sense. My sister, the one I protected and cared for, who used to wait up to make sure I got home safe, why would she do this? The next part is kind of a blur. Meetings with lawyers. My parents hired one for Anne but told me to find my own. The public defender they assigned me was fresh out of law school and already convinced I was guilty. She told me my options. I could fight it. but she made it clear that winning wasn't likely. "Juries believe victims," she said flatly. "And Anne is young, emotional, and convincing." She laid out the reality. If I went to trial, I was facing up to 20 years in prison. The plea deal was mercy, 5 years probation, lifetime registry, but no jail time. "If you take this to trial and lose," she warned, "you won't get another chance." My own parents weren't even on my side. Dad just shook his head. "Don't put your sister through a trial," he said. "Just take the deal." "But I'm innocent," I said. "They all say that," she replied, without looking up from her papers. "They have your sister's testimony, documentation of behavioral changes, witness statements about your possessive behavior. No jury will believe you over a traumatized 16-year-old girl. Dad came to see me once before I accepted the deal. I hadn't seen him since he dropped me at the station. I thought maybe he'd finally realized the truth. Instead, he said, 'Just admit what you did, Eric. Don't make your sister go through a trial.'" "Dad, please," I begged. "You know me. You know I'd never." He cut me off. "I thought I knew you. Guess I didn't." That was the last real conversation I had with my father. 2 days later, I took the deal and pled no contest to sexual assault of a minor. I got 5 years probation and a lifetime on the registry. Some of you might wonder why I'd plead guilty if I was innocent. The truth is, they break you. They take every normal part of your life and twist it until you can't even trust your own memory. And when everyone, your family, the cops, even your own lawyer, believes you're guilty, you start to think maybe fighting is pointless. Being on the registry destroys your life in ways you'd never expect. Everyone talks about the big restrictions. Can't live near schools, can't get certain jobs, but it's the small things that really get to you. The first place I tried to rent after everything, the landlord was ready to let me sign the lease. Then she did a background check. I still remember her face when she saw the results. She actually backed away like I was going to attack her right there in her office. "I'm sorry," she said. "I have grandchildren who visit. I'm sure you understand." That became my life. People feeling sorry for me while treating me like some kind of monster. Finding work was a nightmare. Most places wouldn't even consider my application once they saw I had to check that box. The few interviews I got usually ended the same way. "We'll call you?" They never did. Finally, I found a guy named Mike who ran a small manufacturing shop. He hired people others wouldn't. Ex-cons, addicts trying to get clean, guys like me. The pay was terrible and the work was hard, but at least it was something. "Look," Mike told me on my first day, "I don't care what you did. Just show up on time and do your job." I worked there for almost 2 years. Then, someone found out about me and started causing problems, telling other workers they shouldn't have to work with someone like me, that I was dangerous. Mike tried to stand up for me, but eventually he had to let me go. "Can't risk losing my whole workforce," he said. At least he gave me decent severance pay. I lost my apartment right after that and ended up living in my car for a while. A Planet Fitness membership became my best friend. $10 a month for a place to shower and use the bathroom. I'd park in 24-hour Walmart lots to sleep. Security usually left me alone if I didn't cause trouble. The worst part wasn't even the practical stuff. It was watching life go on without me through mutual friends on Facebook before they banned me. Saw Anne graduate high school with honors, get a full scholarship to college, and meet some rich guy named Billy at a campus event. Meanwhile, I was eating cold ravioli from a can in my car, trying to figure out where I could park for the night without getting hassled by cops. I made the mistake of trying to date once. Met this girl, Sarah, at one of my jobs. She was nice, and didn't ask too many questions about my past. We went out a few times and things seemed to be going well. Then she asked why I always had to check the address of wherever we were going. I decided to be honest. Told her about the registration requirement, how I had to be careful where I went. I tried to explain that I was innocent, that it was a false accusation. She said she needed time to think. The next day, her brother and 2 of his friends showed up at my workplace. I had to quit that job too. After that, I started hanging out, at a small library branch. The librarian there seemed to figure out my situation but never said anything. She'd just leave books she thought I'd like on the returns cart, mostly technical manuals and electronics books. I guess she'd noticed what I usually read. One day, she caught me looking at online courses and sat down to help me find free ones I could take. "Education is everyone's right," she said. She was the only person who had treated me like a human being in years. I started learning about cryptocurrency through those courses. Figured it was something I could do without anyone checking my background. Turned out I had a knack for understanding the technical side. I made a little money here and there trading. But you know what really messed me up? Seeing comments on Anne's social media. All these people talking about how brave she was, how amazing it was that she'd overcome her trauma to be so successful. She even wrote an article for her college paper about being a survivor. People were calling her an inspiration. Meanwhile, I was barely surviving. Funny how that works, right? I used to think about trying to clear my name, but who would believe me? Anne was this perfect, successful college student. I was just some creep living in his car. The system doesn't care about people like me. That's how I spent most of my 20s, moving from job to job, place to place, never staying anywhere long enough for people to find out about me, never making friends because what's the point when they'll just leave once they know? Some nights I'd lie in my car looking at old family photos on my phone, pictures of me and Anne when we were kids, trying to figure out where it all went wrong, what I could have done differently. That's the thing about being on the list. It doesn't just take away your freedom, it takes away your past, your future, your whole identity. You stop being a person and become a label. But suddenly, everything changed. It was just a normal Tuesday. I was at work, found another factory job better than the last one, when I got an email from some private investigator. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something made me read it. The PI said he'd been hired by Anne's husband, Billy, to look into her past. Guess she'd been acting weird lately, and Billy started digging. The PI had found inconsistencies in her story about me and wanted to talk. I ignored it at first. Had enough people messing with my life already. But then he sent another email with proof he was legit. Court documents, case files, stuff I'd never seen before. We met at a diner just outside town. The PI, I'll call him Frank, had this massive folder of documents. "Your sister's story is falling apart," he said, spreading papers across the table. "Been doing this job 30 years. Never seen someone mess up their own lie this badly." Turns out Anne had been sloppy. Really sloppy. The timeline she gave about when things supposedly happened didn't match school records. The witness statements from her friends changed every time she told the story. But what completely blindsided me was this. Remember Jake, the senior who kept hitting on her? Turns out he wasn't just some guy sniffing around. She'd been secretly dating him. And not just that. She got caught in his car doing things she definitely wasn't supposed to be doing. She was convinced I was going to tell our parents about it. Maybe because she knew I'd always been protective, or maybe just out of pure panic. Either way, she needed a distraction, something big and shocking enough to make sure no one even thought about Jake. So, she made up the accusations, knowing that once those words were out, nothing else would matter. Frank had texts between Anne and her friends from back then, screenshots she thought were deleted. In them, she literally planned the whole thing, talked about how she needed a nuclear option to keep me quiet. She didn't expect it to go as far as it did, Frank said. Reading these messages, it seems like she thought they'd just send you away to live with relatives or something. When your dad went full scorched earth, she was too scared to take it back. I just sat there reading through everything, seeing proof of what I'd known all along. Frank kept talking. "Billy hired me because she's been acting strange lately. Drinking, too much, getting paranoid. He found her crying over old family photos one night. When he asked about you, she completely shut down. That's when he called me." Then Frank pulled out one last document, a signed confession from Anne. Billy had confronted her with all the evidence, and she broke down and told him everything. "I need you to understand something," Frank said. "This isn't going to magically fix everything." The legal system doesn't like admitting it made a mistake, but it's a start. He left me with copies of everything. I spent that whole night reading through it all. The texts where she planned it, the confession where she finally admitted the truth. I even found some posts she made on a forum asking how to make abuse allegations more believable. The next day I called a lawyer, a real one this time, not some overworked public defender who had already decided I was guilty. We filed for post-conviction relief based on the new evidence. My lawyers said Anne's confession, combined with the discrepancies Frank uncovered, was strong enough to overturn my conviction and get me removed from the registry. It took months of hearings, but eventually a judge ruled in my favor. My record was wiped clean. I should have felt relief. I should have felt something. But all I could think about was how long it had taken and how much I had lost in the process. A week later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew who it was from before I even opened it. My parents, the first contact in 10 years. My hands shook as I tore it open. Not from excitement, just sheer disbelief. Inside was a letter, written in my dad's stiff, impersonal handwriting. They wanted to meet and said Anne had finally come clean. Well, partially. She spun some watered-down version of the truth, painting herself as a scared little girl who made a terrible mistake. No mention of the calculated lies, the years of suffering she caused me, but apparently it was enough for them to finally believe I was innocent. Tucked inside the envelope was a check for $50,000, a number that probably felt generous to them, like it could somehow erase a decade of being treated like a monster, like it could buy back my stolen years, my dignity, my life. I held it up to the light for a second, then laughed. Nothing had changed. They still thought problems could be solved with a price tag. Money wasn't what I needed. I needed the truth to be known, and I needed to hear it from someone else's mouth. So I took the number from Frank and called him. My hands were shaking when I finally dialed. He answered after a few rings, his voice wary. "Hello, Billy. This is Eric." There was a long pause, then cautiously, "Eric? Who?" I let that sting for a moment before answering, "Anne's brother." Silence. Then a low, humorless chuckle. That's funny, because Anne never mentioned having a brother. Never mentioned any family, actually. I swallowed the immediate anger rising in my chest. Yeah, that tracks. Can't have the skeletons in her closet running their mouths, right? Billy exhaled sharply. Jesus, I knew she was hiding things, but this... I've been married to this woman for years, had a kid with her, and I didn't even know she had a brother. Not one she didn't completely destroy first, I said flatly. There was another pause before he muttered, "Unbelievable." His voice had that tight edge of someone realizing just how deeply they'd been played. Then he sighed, and when he spoke again, his voice was firm. "Final, I'm filing for divorce." I didn't say anything at first, just let the weight of his words settle between us. Then finally I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Good," I said. "You deserve better." I hung up after that. No point in saying anything else. But as I set my phone down, a strange sense of relief washed over me. Then I found the social media posts. Anne deactivated all her accounts, but not before posting a long apology about how she'd remembered things wrong as a teenager, made herself sound like the victim somehow. A poor, confused girl who made a mistake, now bravely coming forward with the truth. Her perfect life started falling apart after that. Billy filed for divorce. The school where she worked, she became a teacher, asked her to resign. Turns out they don't like having teachers who've admitted to making false abuse allegations. I found out later that Billy got full custody of their kid, used Anne's confession to prove she was unstable. She tried to fight it, but Frank's investigation uncovered other lies too. Lots of them. The real truth, she'd been lying about everything for years, not just about me. She made up stories about other people too, had this whole pattern of accusing guys of things when things didn't go her way. Some people asked why she finally confessed. According to Frank, my parents had started noticing things. Anne had been acting erratic for months, disappearing for hours without explanation, having sudden outbursts over nothing, drinking too much at family gatherings. But the final straw came when she slipped up during a heated argument with my mom. She blurted something out, something about how Eric wouldn't have suffered if Dad hadn't overreacted. My mom froze, pressed her for details, and tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The doubt had already been planted. My dad, ever the controlling figure, started digging. He started reaching out to people from Anne's past, even called her old high school friends. Just like that, the cracks in her story began to show. By the time Billy hired Frank, Anne was already spiraling, desperately trying to patch together a lie that was quickly falling apart. So when Billy confronted her with the evidence, the texts, the inconsistencies, the proof she thought was buried deep, she broke down. That's when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying for hours. "Eric, please, we need to talk." I almost hung up then, but something in her tone kept me on the line. She started rambling about Anne, about how she'd finally told them her side, how she admitted to making mistakes, but that she was young, scared, and confused. "She's not the same person anymore," my mother insisted. "She's broken. Eric, she cries every day. She knows she ruined your life and she can barely live with herself." Then they actually asked, "Can't you just forgive her?" That made my blood boil. Forgive? As if she'd borrowed my car and crashed it. As if she'd stolen money from me. As if she hadn't ripped away my entire life, left me in ruins while she moved on playing the victim for years. "You don't understand," my mom continued. "She's suffering now too." That was the moment I decided to meet them. Not for closure, not to rebuild some broken family bond. I wanted them to know exactly what they did to me. "Fine," I said. "Let's meet." But I already knew how it was going to end. We met at a restaurant halfway between our cities. Mom started crying as soon as she saw me. Dad just sat there looking old and broken. Guess having your golden child turn out to be a liar does that to you. Mom tried to hug me. I stepped back. "Let's just sit down," I said. They had this whole speech prepared about how sorry they were, how they should have believed me, how they wanted to rebuild our family. Dad even pulled out his checkbook again, like throwing money at it would fix everything. "Put that away," I told him. "I didn't come here for your money." Mom kept saying things like, "We were just trying to protect your sister," and "We did what we thought was right at the time," making excuses like always. I let them talk themselves out. Then I pulled out the folder Frank gave me and started reading Anne's texts aloud, the ones where she planned the whole thing. I watched their faces as they realized just how badly their precious daughter had played them. She was scared. Mom tried to defend her. She was just a child. I was barely an adult, I said. Where was my protection? Where was my benefit of the doubt? Dad tried next. "We know we messed up. We want to make it right." "Make it right?" I laughed. "Can you give me back my 20s? Can you undo the registry, the jobs I lost, the people who treated me like garbage?" They just sat there, finally out of excuses. I told them everything then, about living in my car, showering at Planet Fitness, eating cold food because I couldn't afford a kitchen. I showed them the scars on my wrists from my lowest point. Mom threw up in the restaurant bathroom. For the first time in years, my parents were finally forced to face the truth, the undeniable proof that they had thrown away their own son without hesitation, that their golden child wasn't golden at all. I watched them sit there in stunned silence, their whole world crumbling in real time. "You did this," I said, voice steady. "You let it happen." My father looked like he wanted to argue, to defend himself, but for once he didn't. He just stared at the table, jaw clenched. Mom, though, she still tried. "Eric, we were just trying to protect her. We thought we were doing the right thing." I leaned back, letting out a slow breath. "You know what the worst part is? I get that. I do. If I actually was some kind of monster, you would have done what any decent parent should do. But you never even gave me a chance. Not once. You decided I was guilty because it was easier than questioning Anne, and you let me rot for it." Tears streamed down her face. "We were wrong," she whispered. We were so wrong. I let that sit for a moment because, yeah, they were wrong. More than wrong. But nothing they said could ever undo what I had lost. The 10 years where I wasn't a person, just a label. Mom reached across the table, her hand shaking. Please, Eric, we can't change the past, but we're still your parents. Can we at least try to fix this? I pulled my hand back before she could touch me. Fix it, I scoffed. Tell me, Mom, how exactly do you fix 10 years? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Dad finally spoke. You have every right to hate us. His voice was hoarse, edged with pain. But we're still your family. I shook my head. No, you stopped being my family the moment you decided I wasn't worth fighting for. A heavy silence settled between us. They had expected anger, maybe even screaming, but I was past all that. I didn't need to yell. They were drowning in their own guilt without me saying another word. Then Mom played her last card. Anne is suffering too, Eric. I stared at her. Of course she would say that. She lost everything. She continued. Her marriage, her career, her friends, she deserved to. I cut in, my voice cold. Mom recoiled like I had slapped her. She made a choice, I said, leveling my gaze at them both. She lied, and I paid the price. But you, I looked directly at my father, who flinched under my stare. You made a choice too. You believed her without a second thought. You let them take me without hesitation. Dad shut his eyes for a moment as if he could block out the truth. Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. She's not the same person anymore. I let out a dry chuckle. Neither am I. And that was the real tragedy, wasn't it? The person they had known, the boy who spent hours in his room fixing radios, who would have done anything for his little sister, he was gone. They had buried him a decade ago when they let the cops take me away. I grabbed the check my father had put on the table earlier. $50,000, a number they'd probably pulled out of thin air, thinking money could erase what they'd done. I stared at it for a second, then ripped it in half. I don't need your money, I said. I don't need anything from you. Mom started sobbing. Dad said nothing. He just sat there like a man finally realizing he'd lost something he could never get back. I stood up. You made your choice, I said quietly. Now you get to live with it. I walked out without looking back. I didn't feel anything when I left that restaurant. No rush of victory, no weight off my shoulders. Just nothing. And maybe that was the real closure. A few weeks later I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew who it was from, before I even opened it. It was from Anne. I stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. The letter inside was short. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. That was it. No excuses, no explanation. Just that. I held it for a moment, then set it down, and I never wrote back. And yeah, life didn't magically become perfect after that. The damage had been done, and I would always carry the scars of those 10 years. But I was finally free, really free. With my record expunged, I could finally live without the weight of my past hanging over me. I moved to a new city, started fresh, built up my electronics repair business from the ground up, and I never looked back. My parents, and all of it, they became ghosts of a life I'd left behind. Maybe one day I'd think about them and feel something. But for now, I was finally living my life on my own terms.